Welcome to episode 1 of the Ibiza Past podcast. In this podcast series, we'll be taking an in-depth look at the history of Ibiza, as well as sharing some myths, legends, strange news stories and funny tales from Ibiza's past. In future episodes, there'll be interviews from a mixture of people who've either been on holiday, lived or worked in Ibiza, as well as conversation with some key players who have helped to shape the island as we know it. Expect to hear some real life stories about what people got up to that may just also involve a little bit of debauchery along the way. Please make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you don't miss a single episode. And finally, if you have any stories to tell or photos to share, please get in touch with us at ibizapast@gmail.com. Our very first story, or collection of stories, is about Vedra. Standing at almost 400 metres high, just off the southwest coast of Ibiza, stands this magical rock. If you've had the chance to visit, you will realise just how magical this place is, and it's definitely one of the most unique spots, not just in Ibiza but in the world, and it takes your breath away every time you see it. Up until recently, you used to be able to drive quite close and there's a short walk to get directly in front of it, but in recent years the path has been blocked and you need to park up and walk for about half an hour to get there, but I promise it's definitely worth the hassle. Vedra's status as a place of myth-making has been around since ancient times. It's been suggested it's the birthplace of the goddess Tanit, whose statue you will see all across Ibiza. There are many more legends, however, that exist about Vedra, and we're going to share just a few of them on today's podcast. To kick off, did you know the Triangle of Silence is the Mediterranean's very own Bermuda Triangle? There's a triangle point between the areas of Vedra, the Rock of Ifak in Alicante, and the southwest coast of Mallorca. It's said that as with the Bermuda Triangle, boats and navigation systems suffer from faults and strange interferences, and boats have also been known to disappear. I can actually vouch for this story, as a friend of mine went out to sea on a pedalo from San Antonio back in 1995, and we've never seen or heard from him since. Our second fact about Vedra is that it has its very own sea monster that lives underneath it. Sailors from the area have declared sightings of huge shadows under their boats, and divers have also come to hear strange sounds under the sea. So next time you're there, see if you can spot Vedra's very own sea monster. Our next fact about Vedra, and Ibiza in general, is that it has some of the highest number of UFO sightings in the world. The founder of what is today the parish of Escubes in San Josep, Father Palau, wrote about a strange phenomenon sightings way back in 1854. There have also been reported gigantic circles of light of up to 50 metres in diameter that emerged from the sea that have apparently discouraged fishermen from fishing in the area. Some of the hippie community who were around Ibiza in the 1960s still claim Vedra as a beacon to guide aliens to Earth. Maybe that is what the circles of light are for. Also, in 1979, the pilot of a plane thought he saw a strange light that moved very quickly when flying over the rock of Vedra. The pilot then contacted the control tower, which was unable to identify the luminous object in question. The pilot then decided to choose a different flight path. A lot of people know the claim that Vedra could be a lost piece of Atlantis, the utopian kingdom that sank deep into the ocean, never to be found again. But did you also know that some people claim that the famous Egyptian pyramids were built from pieces of this rock, as the limestone is thought to contain a huge concentration of energy? The limestone has energy due to the presence of large quantities of metal and quartz crystal, which result in a strong magnetic field. Vedra is one of the most magnetic places on Earth, and only the Bermuda Triangle and the North Pole are stronger. And a little known fact, if you have a decent watch with metal workings, and if you stand with your wrist out facing the rock for 10 minutes, the dial will eventually start spinning around really quickly. Try it next time you visit. Our final Vedra story is a bit of a sad one. Goats were first introduced to Vedra during the 20th century. They disappeared and then had a second coming, reappearing 25 years later in 1992. Because the goats were causing soil erosion by pulling out the protective layer of grass, it meant that any rainfall on Vedra would wash away the soil. At the time, there was a petition signed by around 6,000 people to prevent the extermination of the goats and to get them transported off Vedra to mainland Spain. Unfortunately, due to the difficulty of being able to transport them off the island safely, it was decided that the best way was to kill them rather than remove them. So in 2016, environmental agents sailed over to the island and shot all the helpless creatures. The slain animals were then left on Vedra to decompose naturally, as it was also deemed too dangerous to remove the carcasses. It has been rumoured that if you go late at night when it's deathly silent, you can hear the noises of the ghostly ghost goats coming from the rock of Vedra. This is my favourite tale about the orange juice man of Ibiza. A guy in 1988, a high flyer from the city of London, went to Ibiza with a crowd of mates. The drug of choice at that time was acid, and this guy managed to get a sheet of 100 at a dirt cheap price to take on holiday with him. He self-taped the sheet to his stomach and then pulled his t-shirt and sweatshirt over the top for the flight. They all arrived at Ibiza airport, went to pick up their bags and then drifted towards the exit to get the bus to San Antonio. The group of friends however got split up and two of the guys, including the one with acid, got stopped at customs. The other two tried to get the bus to wait, but after 10 minutes they had to go. They just assumed they'd got on the wrong bus or got a taxi and they would see them at the apartment. And remember, this was long before the joys of having a mobile phone. The two that got stuck at customs were held back for about 45 minutes as a family had also been stopped just in front of them. By this time the guy with acid was really starting to sweat, what with the heat and paranoia. Anyway, they got through okay, but by this time the acid had started to melt into his skin. Another hour later, they arrived by taxi at the apartment where the other two friends were. The guy stripped off and there was a sodden bit of paper stuck to his stomach. He ripped it off and left it to dry, but was starting to feel the effects of taking 100 hits in one. An hour later and the guy was away with it. His mates had left him in his bed while they sat on the balcony as they thought he would just be able to sleep it off. When they heard him screaming, they ran through to his room and saw that he was in a terrible state, thinking he was a glass of orange juice and sitting upright as he thought he would spill. They calmed him down and gave him some vodka and sleeping pills to try and get him to chill out and just fall asleep. He went quiet and they all went to their rooms to try and get some sleep. 2 hours later, in the middle of the night, they heard him screaming again and rushed through to where they'd left their friend. They found him bleeding badly from the arm with a knife in his hand. He had tried to peel himself. Anyway, things got worse and the guy managed to get out of the apartment when he said he was going to the toilet. He was then not seen again for 9 days when they bumped into him, filthy and unshaven, sitting with a bunch of hippies at Café Del Mar. They tried to talk to him, but he stared blankly. They tried for 4 hours to talk sense into him as they were leaving that next day, but eventually he just got up and left with a group of hippies. There have been mixed reports about this guy, that he still lives to the north of the island. His well-paid job obviously now just a distant memory. I was always in two minds about this myth, but I bumped into him a couple of years ago in Formentera and had a chat with him. He's a well-spoken guy who can't remember anything that happened in the first 12 months, and he still gets flashbacks and he can sit up thinking that he's going to spill. So what do you make about the story of the orange juice man of Ibiza? Certainly one of the maddest stories that I've ever heard. If you do ever get the chance and bump into him, sit down and have a chat. He's certainly got a really interesting story to tell. This is quite a mad story from more recent times in 2014, but also quite a sad one for the people involved. A group of Italians were coming back from a club one night when one of the passengers had their lower arm ripped off while hanging out of the vehicle's window. The unnamed Italian, who was 28 years old, had put his arm out of the window while the car was travelling too close to a metal crash barrier, just near the roundabout outside Privilege. The mad thing is the driver of the car didn't stop until they were pulled over by the Guardia Civil some 4 kilometres away. Police officers assessed the severity of the man's injury and immediately called for an ambulance. The driver of the car was given a breathalyzer test and probably not surprisingly revealed that he was over the legal limit. The officers then got a mobile intensive care unit to go to the site as well as other patrol cars to try and retrieve the limb. The arm that was severed in the crash was found at the side of the road and was packed in ice. The wounded man was then driven in an ambulance to the Can Mrs Hospital, while the police also took the arm to the medical centre. Once there, transport was arranged to transfer the patient by helicopter to Hospital Espaces in Palma, Mallorca. Unfortunately, the detached limb that had been recovered from the site of the accident was unable to be reattached by surgeons due to the damage sustained. The 39-year-old driver of the Audi A3 was arrested for driving under the influence of alcohol and another offence of reckless injury. I am sure everyone will agree that this is a very sad story, but it also highlights the dangers of people drink driving or even accepting a lift from someone who's under the influence. Please stay safe and always make sure you get a legal taxi home. In my opinion, one of the best books written about Ibiza's history is The White Island by Stephen Armstrong, a well-written, insightful history of Ibiza. There's an excellent chapter on the hippies of Ibiza, and that isn't the main part of this story, but definitely one to be covered in a future podcast. In the 60s, as the hippie movement spread from San Francisco across the world, a huge number settled in Ibiza, attracted to the cheap rent and rural lifestyle. Alongside the likes of Hare Krishnas in Ibiza town, the island was selected by the Bagwhan Rajneesh cult as its European base. The cult began in India in 1969 and then spread across the hippie trail and then also onto America. Before I continue with this story, I need to share something that happened to me when I first read about this story I'm going to tell. And I promise you this isn't bollocks, okay? By a total bizarre coincidence, when I was reading about this in the White Island book for the very first time back in 2008, I was spending a day at the only place the cult was still active, their original home in Pune in India. It's a long story, but easily one of the strangest days I've ever had in my life, and I'll give you a very quick summary of what happened that day before I get back to the main point of the story I was trying to tell. My wife was working in Pune in India, and she'd flown across there a week earlier before we flew down to Goa for some sun and fun. I had some time to kill during the day, so as you do, I enrolled in the cult, and it's now, I believe, been rebranded as the Osho International Foundation, but you could buy a day's membership. I think it's a taster before they made you sell your house and join them full time. So I bought my red robes from the little shop down the road and I rocked up to see what was behind the massive gates. I should have known something was up when I got an AIDS test before I was even allowed to enter. I read about this afterwards and I believe the free love kicks in when the sun goes down. To make it perfectly clear, I left a long time before the sun went down. I got in and there was just these amazing Japanese gardens, waterfalls, a massive pyramid and a massive big concrete circle with a DJ wearing the red robes, playing shit Eurotrance to hundreds of people dancing and laughing. It was an amazingly lush place in comparison to the rest of Pune, which is mainly poverty stricken. I had to endure a 3-hour welcome workshop before I was allowed to wander about, which mainly involved dancing, manic laughing and forced crying amongst other things with a bunch of strangers I'd never met before. It definitely went down as one of the strangest Tuesday mornings I've ever had. Anyway, it was beside the Japanese garden where I settled down to chill and read the book just at the chapter that started exploring the story of the cult and how it had a huge influence in Ibiza, and I just think that's such a mad and bizarre coincidence. On with the original story I was trying to tell. MDMA was patented in 1914. There's been some dispute as to whether it was manufactured as an appetite suppressant, but it was never marketed and disappeared into obscurity. MDMA was studied by the US Army in the 1950s as a potential agent in psychological warfare, but the results were not declassified for 2 decades. In 1965, the infamous Alexander Shulgin manufactured MDMA in his laboratory, but it was not until the 1970s that MDMA began to be used in psychotherapy, where it is described by one user as penicillin for the soul. Although then virtually unknown in the UK, in 1977 MDMA was made illegal under the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act. MDMA, however, remained legal in the USA until 1985. In the 1980s, the Bagwhan Rajneesh was at odds with the government in India and so decided to buy a ranch in Oregon. He sent his followers ahead to create this utopia. They built a giant dam, an airport, an electricity station and a meditation centre that could hold 10,000 people. When it was ready, Rajneesh and his followers relocated to the US. You might have watched the Netflix documentary Wild Wild Country that tells a full story of how the Bagwhan Rajneesh tried to create the utopia in Oregon. If you haven't seen it, I can highly recommend it to watch. In the USA and Ibiza, members of the Bagwhan Rajneesh group used MDMA as part of their self-enlightenment rituals. They'd come across MDMA at the Stark nightclub in Dallas, where the drug was sold legally over the bar. The drug then filtered from the Stark to the Osho and then to Ibiza. The Bagwhan Rajneesh cult members fled their commune following a 1984 bioterror attack in which they laced salad bars in the state with salmonella in a badly conceived bid to lower turnout in local elections and win more votes for their own candidates. There was also a massive tax evasion case that just didn't make things any easier. The commune members operating in San Juan also broke up at this time, and bemused cultists wandered the island with pockets full of MDMA. It didn't take long for clubbers and cultists to meet, and before long Alfredo was playing to packed houses of enlightened clubbers. Members then set about spreading their chemical love to all and sundry. Never before had there been a club where so many people were on ecstasy at the same time. The rest, as they say, is history. So, if it wasn't for the Bagwhan Rajneesh cult from San Juan, what we know of Ibiza today may never have been. Our next fact is about Nostradamus, who died in 1566, but has been lauded for centuries because so much of what he foretold appeared to come true. He wrote almost 1,000 lines predicting the future, including the 9/11 attacks in New York, the rise of Adolf Hitler, the Great Fire of London, and also coincidentally the current pandemic troubling us all. Did you know, however, that he predicted that Ibiza would be the only place to survive a nuclear holocaust? He wrote that Ibiza will be Earth's final refuge after Armageddon. He predicted that Ibiza's peculiar prevailing wind patterns will ensure that it would be the only remaining life-supporting environment left on Earth. Unfortunately, Nostradamus didn't give us a timescale for this, but what I would advise is next time there's an impending nuclear holocaust, jump on that Ryanair website as soon as you can and try and get yourself a flight to Ibiza. Not a lot of people know that there was a bull ring in Ibiza town up until the 90s. The Ibiza bull ring, or the Plaza de Toros de Ibiza, opened on the 17th of September 1961 and was last used for bullfighting on the 22nd of September 1985. It was demolished sometime in the 90s after serious financial problems from the owners and a lot of criminal activity around ownership and use rendered it not fit for any purpose. The ground in which it was located is now a car park in front of Ibiza Town's Hotel Royal Plaza, but to most people it is most famous for being the location of the 1978 Bob Marley concert and is now also a park that stands in its place named after Bob Marley. At the time, the Bob Marley concert was huge, as this was going to be the first time that a Jamaican musician would perform in Spain, and Television Española covered his arrival to the island. There was a crew of 19 people on the flight, and the civil guard of the island had the strict order not to search any of the plane's passengers, even knowing that they had a shitload of smoke with them. The band were due to come on at 8 PM but didn't start until 10 PM. During the 2-hour wait for the concert to begin, the whole of the newly released album at the time, Live and Dangerous by Thin Lizzy, was continuously played on a loop. DJ Pippi also travelled to Ibiza for the very first time for that concert, so one of the legendary founders of the Balearic sound may never have arrived in Ibiza if it wasn't for Bob Marley. Although Bob Marley was the most famous artist to play at the Bull Ring on the 28th of June 1978, the massive racist Eric Clapton had already played there the year before, on August the 5th, 1977. As part of the same concert series that Bob Marley played at called Music Ibiza 78, Thin Lizzy played on the 6th of July with support from Suzi Quatro. Famously, this was Thin Lizzy's last ever gig with legendary guitarist Brian Robbo Robertson, and he was soon replaced by Gary Moore. The final concert as part of the Music Ibiza 78 trilogy was Ian Dury and the Blockheads, who played on the 14th of July. I'm sure everyone will agree that the Bob Marley concert at the Ibiza Bull Ring must have been one of the most amazing concerts ever, I just wish I was lucky enough to have been there. Christopher Columbus, according to most records, was born in Genoa in 1451, though there are many theories about his origins, one of which is that he's actually from Ibiza. While this has never been proven, studies have led researchers to believe that his mother tongue was Catalan, as he spoke and wrote in such a style, using words typical to Catalan native speakers. It has been argued that his real name was Colom, the Spanish form of Columbus, and that he was a member of the powerful Jewish Colom family of Ibiza. As most residents and visitors to Ibiza will know, on the roundabout on the main road just as you enter San Antonio, there's a huge statue of an enormous egg known as the Egg of Columbus. This is in recognition of an interesting story about Columbus, where during a banquet thrown in his honour after his return from his voyages, some noblemen claimed that his discovery of the Americas was no big deal, and that anyone with the same equipment and ship would have been able to do the very same thing. Columbus said nothing in answer to these comments, but lay a wager with everyone that they couldn't make an egg stand on its tip, unsupported. When no one was able to do it, Columbus simply took the egg, tapped it on the table to flatten the tip, and the egg stood without falling over. The moral of the story was that once you've been shown how to do something, it is easy, whereas to discover something new without help or knowing the answer is much more difficult. No one really knows if Columbus was really from Ibiza. However, the people of Ibiza do tend to claim that several famous people were actually born on the island. I've been told a number of times from different people that Paul McCartney was actually born in a room above the ship inn and not Liverpool, and a Scouse accent is put on. Who knows what to believe? Was Columbus actually born in Ibiza? And more importantly, why is there not a massive big statue of Paul McCartney outside the ship inn in San Antonio? To finish, we've got another strange story that happened more recently, back in 2014. Two German tourists had been flying about 160 foot in the air with a parachute hooked by a cable to a speedboat when a terrifying incident happened. The weather was quite stormy and there were high winds, so we're not too sure why they decided to go paragliding, but anyway the cable snapped, leaving them to fly towards San Antonio. The pair were eventually blown over land, where the parachute was caught on the roof of the Hotel Millard, 130 foot off the ground. Luckily for them, the parachute got caught in the lightning rod. Emergency services were called and an ambulance took them to a nearby hospital where they were treated for head trauma. Local police questioned the captain of the boat, and they were assured that there was no evidence of the presence of wind in the weather forecast, although Ibiza had been on a yellow alert for strong storms and there had been rain and lightning since the previous day. I'm not sure how plausible the captain's story is, but what we do know is the German tourists were very lucky to have been caught on the lightning rod on top of that hotel roof. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. If you have any stories we should cover, or you feel that you have a story to tell through an interview, please get in touch with us at ibizapast@gmail.com. Thanks again, and until next time.